Chapter 5. They followed a line of passengers onto the airfield. It was drizzling, but the cold rain hadn't stopped a crowd of people from gathering to watch the zeppelin take off. It was like a party, with photographers snapping pictures and the band playing brassy German tunes. The loud music woke up Gertie, who stared in amazement at the Hindenburg. It loomed over like a silver mountain. A smiling man in a uniform stood in front of a metal staircase. The stairs led up into the belly of the airship. "Welcome, women," he said. "Welcome." They walked up the stairs and into another world. To Hugo, it seemed they had entered a fancy hotel from the future. They found their cabin, which was small and very modern. The sleek bunk beds were made with thick blankets and silky sheets. The sink and desk even folded up and down to make extra room. Hugo had never seen anything like it. They left their suitcases and coats in the cabin and did a quick tour of the 2 floors of the small passenger area. They peeked into the dining room. Long tables were set with white cloths and sparkling dishes, and flowers that looked as if just been picked from someone's garden. Down the hall was the lounge. On the wall was the hand-painted mural of the word, with zeppelins zipping across the sky. Hugo wanted to explore every inch of the passenger area, but it was time for the zeppelin to take off, and so they joined a small group of passengers standing along a row of windows. The windows actually slanted down, so they had the perfect view of the action on the airfield. Muscled crewmen were unhooking the ropes that held the zeppelin to the ground. Hugo hadn't noticed that someone had sat down next to him. It was a girl about his age. She had dark blonde hair, round brown eyes, and a face scattered with freckles. "First time on a zeppelin?" she asked. "Yes," Hugo answered. "What about you?" She paused for a few seconds, counting silently on her fingers. "It's my 8th time," she said. "Wow," Hugo said with surprise. 8 times? This girl must be a millionaire. Each Hindenburg ticket cost $450, almost as much as a new car. Hugo guessed that Mom and Dad had used the rest of Aunt Sylvie's money to pay for this trip. "I'm Martha Singer," the girl said, "but call me Monty." "Hugo." "That's my father," she said, pointing across the room to a friendly-looking man with puffy hair and round glasses. "He worked for the Zeppelin Company. They own the Hindenburg." Hugo's mouth dropped open. "Your dad owns the Hindenburg?" "No," she laughed, but not in a way that made Hugo feel dumb. "He just worked for the company in the American office in New York City. We go to Germany a few times a year, and you always take a zeppelin?" "We do," Marty said. "And every trip I see something different. Last time I got to see a whole family of dolphins. They leaped up out of the water when we flew over them. Maybe they wanted to hitch a ride on a Heisenberg," Hugo said. "Who doesn't?" Marty grinned. A warm feeling filled Hugo's chest, like when he would sip hot chocolate on a freezing New York day. He tried to remember the last time he talked to a kid his own age. Their house in Kenya was surrounded by wilderness, and the nearest village was 20 miles away. Hugo hadn't made any friends in Kenya unless you counted the one-eared baboon. Hugo had the urge to tell Marty all about that baboon and other things too, but now it was Gertie's turn to talk. She turned to Marty and smiled. "You're pretty. You look like a cheetah." This was one of Gertie's games, to match a person to the animal he or she looked like, and Marty seemed very happy to be compared to a curious spotted cat. "Thank you," she exclaimed. She narrowed her eyes and studied Gertie. "And you look like a gazelle with pigtails." Gertie's pale face lit up. Just then a man's voice thundered over the loudspeaker. "Sniff off! Up ship!" The men on the airstrip let go of the anchor ropes and leaped backwards, away from the zeppelin. Hugo grabbed hold of Gertie, bracing for a sharp jolt as the zeppelin took flight, but he didn't feel a thing. Like a feather lifted by the breeze, the great airship rose silently off the earth. Hugo almost forgot to breathe as the world outside got smaller and smaller. The people on the ground shrank into dots. "It's magical, isn't it, Hugo?" Marty said. And it was. The airfield's lights twinkled like stars. Up, up, up they rose, and then vroom. The four engines rumbled to life, and they began to streak forward through the sky. Hugo felt like a fairy tale giant. He flew over his kingdom of doll-sized houses and churches and matchstick forests. Gertie turned to Hugo, her face glowing with wonder, and for the first time in months, she laughed. The sing-song giggle rushed into Hugo's heart and swept away his worries and fears. And for that moment, at least, Hugo let himself believe really was the luckiest kid on the planet. Chapter 6. The next day, Tuesday, May 4th, 1 p.m., aboard the Hindenburg. Hugo helped himself to another warm roll, which was as fluffy as the clouds out the window. He had already eaten 4, but nobody seemed to mind. That morning he stuffed himself at breakfast, creamy eggs and sizzling sausages. This lunch was even more delicious. The tender steak practically melted on his tongue. The asparagus was covered with so much melted cheese it actually tasted good. The family was sharing a big table with Marty and her dad, Mr. Singer, and a few other passengers. Hugo sat next to Marty. Had they met only yesterday? He felt like they'd been friends for years. Last night they'd stayed up past midnight, looking out the windows. The Zeppelin's powerful searchlight beamed down. It lit up sleeping villages and turned the Rhine River into a glittering silver ribbon. Marty told Hugo about her life with her father. "My mother died 4 years ago," she said, "so father and I are a team." Hugo had been wondering why she and her dad were traveling alone, and now he had his sad answer. She asked him 100 questions about Kenya, and as he answered, he could almost see Marty traveling there in her mind. He described the little house with the grass roof and explained that Mom and Dad took turns giving him his school lessons. "Are giraffes really the most beautiful animals?" Marty asked. "Yes, and their eyes are huge, and almost like human eyes," Hugo told her. "There was only one ugly part of a giraffe, their tongues. Their tongues are pitch black and about a foot and a half long. he added. Yuck, Marty said as they both burst out laughing. Hugo told Marty about the cobras and the hippos and the one-eared baboon. And then, just before they said goodnight, he told her the story of Gertie's illness. Marty listened with tears in her eyes. But today, here in the bright dining room of the Hindenburg, those sad stories seemed miles away. Gertie had woken up without a fever this morning and was gobbling up her food. Mom and Dad looked almost carefree as they chatted with the new friends. From now on, I will only travel on zeppelins, announced Miss Quotha. She was an older American woman with a big voice and even bigger diamond earrings. Gertie looked up at Hugo, her face shiny with butter from the new toast. Hugo, she whispered, that lady looks like an ostrich. You're right, Gertie, he whispered back, studying Mrs. Quotha's unusually long neck and thin beak-like nose. But keep your voice down. He was pretty sure the elegant Miss Quotha wouldn't like being compared to an enormous screeching bird. I'm usually sick as a dog on a ship, boomed Mr. Merrick, a British man with red hair and a pointy chin, but I haven't been the least bit queasy. Same with Hugo. On the ship to Africa last year, Hugo had been so slammed by seasickness he puked his guts out. But the Hindenburg's ride was so smooth, it was impossible to imagine that they were really zooming through the sky at almost 85 miles per hour. Hugo's stomach felt perfect. Gertie studied Mr. Merrick. He looks like a fox, she whispered. Marty grinned. She wanted in on the game. They all now turned their attention to Mr. Lenz. He was a cheerful German man with a thick, curving mustache and big, pillowy belly. I once flew on an airship, he said, but never again. The noise was terrible. We had to land every 2 hours to get more fuel, and it took us 22 hours to fly from New York to Florida. Hugo had always wanted to fly on an airplane, but he'd heard that they were dangerous. Dad said it would be years before an airplane could fly passengers across the oceans. For now, only the Graf Zeppelin and the Hindenburg could do that. Mr. Lenz looks like a nice walrus, Marty whispered. Gertie giggled, and Hugo and Marty hid their laughing faces behind their fancy linen napkins. But the game was cut short when suddenly Mr. Lenz's knife clattered noisily onto his plate. Hugo looked up and then followed Mr. Lenz's alarmed gaze to the front of the dining room. 3 Nazi officers were standing there, like the men Hugo had seen at the airport. They were all wearing blood-red swastikas armbands and had big Luger pistols hanging from their belts. Mr. Lenz leaned forward. I recognize that tall man in front, he whispered. That's Colonel Joseph Cole. He's known to be a vicious Nazi, very close to Hitler. He's coming over, Miss Quotha said, her eyes bugging out. Mr. Singer stood up. Colonel Cole, Mr. Singer said, shaking the Nazi's hand. I had no idea you were on board. We are staying in the officers' quarters in front, the Nazi replied with a sharp German accent. I was called to New York City for a meeting. What better way to travel than on our glorious Zeppelin? Hugo tried not to stare at the man, but he couldn't stop himself. Cole's white blonde hair was slicked back. He had icy blue eyes, and a small, flat nose that sat above thin lips. As he spoke, his small teeth glistened. Gertie turned to Hugo and pointed at Cole with an excited grin. "Hugo!" she gasped, forgetting to whisper. "That man looks like a big cobra!"